VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are here. We're halfway through the NFL season, right after Monday Night Football. That became the halfway point of the year, and the Vikings are surprisingly 6-2. A lot of us thought they'd be about 7-10, 8-9 if they were feeling frisky, but no, they are in the driver's seat to reach the postseason, possessing about an 80% chance or so to get to the dance, and then maybe get frisky during that. We shall see. Along the way, I guess in the last, for the Vikings, 3 weeks, we've had the NFL's trade cycle, and then Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, yesterday, was the deadline, and the Vikings made 0 moves on deadline day. However, they did onboard Cam Akers again, the second straight year they traded for that guy, a running back from the Houston Texans. And then about a week ago, Cam Robinson, a left tackle replacement for Christian Darrisaw from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who the Vikings play on Sunday. So it wasn't a slow trade deadline for the Vikings. They made 2 deals, and that is a lot. It's just that on deadline day, because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has an MO to make even more trades, some thought, hey, will he sell the first rounder next year for a sweet stud like Dexter Lawrence or something like that? Nope, it was kind of whispers and a nothing burger on trade deadline day. But on the whole, with you guys and gals, I want to go through winners and losers of the trade, the deadline, or in this case, the Vikings trades that they've made in the last 3 weeks. So we'll start with the losers, the pessimistic, and lead our way up to the optimistic. And I'm going to rank these. So when I get to the loser here in about 5-6 minutes, that's the biggest loser from the trade deadline. And then when I get to the winners, the last thing we'll discuss on this episode is the biggest winner. So first, the loser from trade deadline day itself, if you wanted the Vikings to do even more, was the Vikings Super Bowl hopes. So most of us don't think the Vikings are going to win a Super Bowl this year. It was really awesome when they were 5-0. They looked like a Super Bowl contending team, but then they kind of showed their ass in 2 games, and now we're back to 6-2. A couple warts. The win over the Colts was a little greasy with the turnovers. But if, for example, the Vikings firmly believed this was their year, it really ain't shit to start sending your 5th round draft pick from 2026 or your 4th rounder. Like, sending those mid to late rounders for impact players is negligible. It's kind of how the Rams won a Super Bowl in 2021. But the Vikings didn't do that. So they can still win a Super Bowl with this roster if Sam Darnold is unbelievably clutch in January and February. But if you were hellbent, you probably weren't. If you were hellbent that I think this team can win this year, they perhaps should have added a cornerback, a CB, or a defensive tackle, and they simply did not, or they didn't want to pay the price. So if you were in the camp that said, you know what, this is the year the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl, Sam Darnold's going to take me to the promised land, they should have added one more defensive piece, in my opinion. But I think they're looking at the window with J.J. McCarthy as the Super Bowl window, not a all-or-nothing 2024 season with Sam Darnold. So Super Bowl hopes are kind of a loser there. The next one to me is Ed Ingram. So before we knew anything about Cam Robinson coming to the Vikings as a Darrisaw replacement, there was an option for the Vikings to say, hey, we're going to play David Quesenberry. We signed him for a reason. He's going to be our left tackle for the rest of the way. Or, more appealing, moving Blake Brandel, the left guard, to left tackle, because that's what he was organically drafted as in 2020, and then saying, you know what, Dalton Risner, you're going to be the left guard. That plan, the Brandel to tackle plan, would have made Ed Ingram untouchable. Because unless they want to play Dan Feeney or sign some other guard that nobody cares about, Ingram would have been on the chopping block or he would not. He would have been safe, because Risner right now, we think, as nipping at his heels. And so the way that it turned out, when you add a new left tackle completely foreign to the franchise, he takes the left guard spot. Everything remains as is in the other 4 places. And that means if Ed Ingram does not get his poop in a group, Dalton Risner will keep his job. But with the plan with Brandel, maybe kicking him to left tackle, that would have made Ed Ingram mandatory for the rest of the way. So to me, he was a bit of a loser at the trade deadline because the Vikings signed a replacement tackle, and Ed Ingram, can now be replaced by Dalton Risner if the Vikings see fit. The next loser, to an extent, even though I just said that I don't care much about it, I know there are folks that do, is the 2026 draft piggy bank. So the Vikings, due to the Dallas Turner trade, have already bled through most of the 2025 draft class. They retained their first rounder. They didn't do the Drake May trade or anything back in April, so they were able to keep this first rounder, which we think will check in the 20s. And then that's about it. They'll get a compensatory third because Kirk Cousins walked, and then I still think they have 2/5. But when you get to draft time here, and it's not too far away, about 5-6 months, you'll find that per draft capital, the Vikings will be very low on those ranking lists. And then in 2026, in order to get Cam Robinson, in order to get Cam Akers, they had to donate conditional mid-rounders. So in all likelihood, the Cam Robinson trade will cost the Vikings a 4th rounder. And Robinson, I don't think, will return to the team in 2025. So they've already taken from the future. Although it is worth noting that if Cam Robinson walks, that will factor into the Vikings' compensatory formula. So there's a decent chance there's a built-in bet hedge by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to get a draft pick back when Robinson walks. But I know I see the accounts all the time on Twitter and social media in general. There are folks that say keep the draft picks at all costs. We shouldn't be selling a 4th rounder for a 10-game rental in Robinson. So if you believe that, the 2026 draft piggy bank was a slight loser. And then finally on the loser list, I think the biggest loser of the Vikings trade deadline was Ty Chandler. So before Aaron Jones signed in March, we weren't sure what the plan was. They needed to do something to fix the running game. There was always an outside chance that Ty Chandler could have factored into the RB1 solution. He ultimately did not. They signed Aaron Jones, who's been a fantastic free agent signing. But if Aaron Jones fell injured, he almost did there against the Giants, or at least missed more than half the Giants game, it would have been the Ty Chandler show. However, Cam Akers came aboard, about 2.5 weeks ago now, and then we saw on Sunday Night Football that he is either morphing into the RB2, or for some reason in that game they said, you know what, to give Aaron Jones a little bit of relief, we're going to play Cam Akers. So if you're Ty Chandler right now, I think you're on the cusp of looking at an RB3 job where, back in early March, maybe February, you thought, shit, I'm going to be the RB1 for this team. It looks like there has been a little bit of a fall from grace from Ty Chandler. I do think we'll see Ty Chandler get snaps, but the way that the Vikings have traded for Cam Akers in back-to-back seasons leads me to believe that they really like him. The evidence is there. And then if you just rewatch the Colts game, what did Akers get? About 7 touches for 50, 60 yards. He may be transitioning to the RB2, which would put Chandler at RB3 and a loser at the trade deadline. All right, I never like to talk about Vikings losers unless they really deserve it, and a team is 6-2. They're not losers. So let's get into the winners of the trade deadline. When I get to the final one, I have 4 of them. That will be the biggest winner. But at the start of my list, I have Jalen Nailor. Why is Jalen Nailor a winner at the trade deadline? Well, look around the landscape of the NFL. Deontay Johnson, he was traded by the Panthers to the Ravens. And then the Panthers also traded Jonathan Mingo for a 4th-round draft pick, a very high price that Dallas paid for a guy who's totally mid. And then DeAndre Hopkins went to the Chiefs. Wide receiver trade deadline business was booming. And there was always a chance, at least in my mind, that the Vikings would want to upgrade on WR3 and get one of those guys who was just traded or somebody else. Jalen Nailor has played really well in certain spots. He had that sweet block for Justin Jefferson and the 97-yard touchdown. He had the touchdown against the Colts. That was wonderful. So he is developing. He looks good in real time. But if you get to the postseason and you want some dependability, there are better route runners and wide receivers than Jalen Nailor. So if they were serious about this playoff push, I halfway expected them to explore an Adam Thielen type or DeAndre Hopkins if that would have been in the mix. The only reason I think that they held off is A, they like Nailor, and then B, TJ Hawkinson is back. And per the target share, where Sam Darnold's throwing the ball on Sundays, Hawkinson is going to morph into the WR3 and sometimes the WR2 on Sundays. So Jalen Nailor keeps his WR3 job. The next one to me is Shaq Griffin as a winner. In the same type of style argument for Jalen Nailor, there was a plausible chance that Minnesota looked at their roster, realized that their starters are veteran cornerbacks. One of those guys is probably going to get hurt before too long. I hate to say it. between Byron Murphy, Stephon Gilmore, and Shaquille Griffin. None of them are crazy young. Byron Murphy isn't very old, but Stephon Gilmore is old. Shaq Griffin isn't, youthful. So we know that cornerbacks are susceptible to injury, and when that happens, the Vikings are either going to turn to a Caleb Evans, who's had many a gaffe on special teams this year, or Fabian Moreau, who I guess would be a decent solution. But for a playoff contending team, even if they have Sam Darnold, the quarterback, you need to get that out of your mind right now. They're 6-2, no matter the quarterback. They probably should have examined a better contingency plan at cornerback. That's why you heard Marshawn Lattimore in the rumor mill. Greg Newsome from the Browns was twisting in the rumor mill. And I think the Vikings poked around at cornerbacks and ultimately didn't want to pay the price. Therefore, Shaq Griffin keeps his starting job because, let's say, for example, the Vikings paid the price for Lattimore. What was it, a third and a fourth, or a fourth and a fifth? Whatever it was that Washington got Lattimore for. If the Vikings spent that, well, I can tell you right now, Shaq Griffin would be heading to the bench, and the starting cornerbacks would be Lattimore, Byron Murphy, and Stephon Gilmore. But because there was no trades for corners at the deadline, Shaq Griffin will remain a starting quarterback for the Vikings, and hence a winner. All right, winding down the show. You know how I said for Biggest Losers, the 2026 draft piggy bank? Well, a winner is the 2025 draft piggy bank, and mainly the first rounder. So there was a decent school of thought, and I bought into the argument that, hey, you're 6-2, your Super Bowl window appears wide open, and if J.J. McCarthy is indeed good, your Super Bowl window will be open, hopefully indefinitely. Therefore, we think the first rounder from 2025 is trending to be in the 20s. Why not sell that for a proven commodity? And I think this was basically code for Dexter Lawrence. The only problem was Dexter Lawrence wasn't for sale. But I'm sure there were discussions, or at least a temptation in the Vikings front office to say, we are 6-2. We know we're going to the postseason. When we get to draft time, our pick's probably going to be 23, 24, 25, 26. And why don't we sell that now to go get Dexter Lawrence, to get Jeffrey Simmons from the Tennessee Titans? I'm guessing that there was discussions were going down in Egan, but ultimately there probably wasn't a player good enough to send the first rounder elsewhere. If it would have been Dexter Lawrence, I don't know of any Vikings fan that would have been like, nah, I don't like it, save the draft pick. Dexter Lawrence would have felt like a modern-day version of the Jared Allen trade. But for the sake of keeping the team youthful, I think when we get to April, the draft pick will either be a corner or a defensive tackle. But the biggest winner is whoever that guy is. He'll be a Minnesota Viking. And then Kwesi Adofo-Mensah for keeping that first rounder. It'll be a young 22, 23-year-old to accompany J.J. McCarthy in the J.J. McCarthy era. So kudos to the Vikings for not getting too tempted to sell their first rounder. And then finally, my biggest winner from the trade deadline is defensive tackle Jerry Tillery. Sometimes the Vikings call defensive tackles defensive ends in Brian Flores' system, so forgive me if that's what you call them. But with the only really glaring weakness that I think we can pinpoint on this Vikings team, assuming most positions, most guys are healthy, is the interior pass rush. Now, the run defense is doing great. Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, and Harrison Phillips do a wonderful job of stuffing the run. But most Super Bowl contending teams have a pass rush that is generated in the interior in addition to the edges. Right now, the pass rush is kind of a one-trick pony for the Vikings because it all comes from Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, and Dallas Turner. It's coming from the edges. If Jerry Tillery gets the pressure or Harrison Phillips sacks a quarterback, it's like, oh, sweet, look at that, that's fantastic. It's not a mainstay of Vikings defensive football to generate interior pass rush. That's why I've been asking for one of these guys since Kevin Williams retired, but they never listened. So the fact that they were not able to go out and make some seismic trade for Dexter Lawrence, or I don't even know if Jeffrey Simmons was for sale, probably not. The one spot on this team, I think without argument from anybody, where they can improve is interior defensive line pass rush. They didn't go acquire anybody, and therefore Jerry Tillery, who's played pretty well, not a Pro Bowler, but not some, bottom bowl trash. He's played well, like a high 60s PFF. He's going to remain a starter for the rest of the way. All right, so those are the losers, the Super Bowl hopes. If the Vikings wanted to be a real contender, they probably would have got one more impact player. I don't think anybody's too mad. Ed Ingram, the 2026 draft class, they've already sold a fourth rounder, and then Ty Chandler, who appears to be in the process of a RB3 demotion. And then the winners. Jalen Naylor keeps his WR3 job. Shaq Griffin does not get supplanted by Marshawn Lattimore, for example. The 2025 first rounder is safe and intact. And then Jerry Tillery, at least for 10 more games, is one of the Vikings' starting defensive tackles. All right, we'll be back Friday. I believe I'm going to have Sal Spice and Josh Fry. Josh Fry usually joins us on Wednesday, but he works at a Minnesota news station, and I think he had to stay up later than he would like last night because of the election. But we'll catch up with him on Friday. That's all I got for today. Skol, baby.